Hello there. Keir Starmer could be forced to sack a dozen of his frontbenchers tomorrow. So it's not just the Tories with problems. Labour has its own big split right now. Keir Starmer could be faced with sacking quite a few of his own shadow ministers tomorrow, because the SNP has tabled an amendment to the King's speech that, if passed in a vote tomorrow, would force the government to call for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, something the government doesn't want to do. And Labour is really split on that issue right now, despite Starmer following the government line of no ceasefire, but rather pauses in fighting. The SNP amendment calls on the government to join with the international community in urgently pressing all parties to agree to an immediate ceasefire. And we already know that many Labour MPs, including some senior ones, would back that in a heartbeat. Many have already said they would rather resign or be sacked than vote against the call for a ceasefire, something that would put Starmer on the back foot, whether the vote was won or lost, because he has consistently said his party is not backing a ceasefire. So he may be forced to stamp his authority on the party by sacking the dissenters. It all comes down to whether or not the Speaker of the House of Commons, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, selects the amendment for a vote. And many are expecting him to do so. Now, Starmer could just give his MPs a free vote. But what price his authority? It would make him look very weak. It would also store up problems for him next year, should he end up in number 10 while the Gaza Strip conflagration continued. Now, in cold truth, the only parties that can agree to a ceasefire are the Israeli government and the leaders of the Hamas terrorist movement. Everyone else can only wring their hands and ask them to come to some sort of an agreement. And unless I've missed it, neither Hamas nor Israel is asking for a ceasefire. Nor, for that matter, is another potential combatant, Hezbollah. They're still firing rockets and shells at Israel from Lebanon. One member of Labour's National Executive Committee, Mish Rahman, has said on a new website called labourforaceasefirenow.org.uk, "We have seen leaders who claim to represent us rule out the commitment to a ceasefire which would put an end to the terrible violence, open up the opportunity for talks and a move towards a peaceful solution." A commitment from the UK for a ceasefire, when neither party wants one, is not going to alter anything. It might add a little pressure, but the two warring sides have their own aims. Israel is now very determined to exterminate all the Hamas terrorists and retrieve as many of those taken hostage as they can, while Hamas, for its part, is content for the Gaza casualty rate amongst its own people, especially among children, to ratchet up in the hope that others will come in militarily behind them to help them destroy Israel. All this ceasefire posturing by UK politicians ignores that simple reality. In fact, it makes them look naive at best and opportunistic virtue signallers at worst. Yes, there may be a few of them who just want the killing to end, but do they realise that giving Hamas a ceasefire will only allow those terrorists time to regroup, rearm and then strike again, possibly in an even more deadly fashion than they did on the 7th of October? And being a cynic, I believe that some of those calling for a ceasefire want exactly that. A chance for Hamas to survive and fight another day. Maybe not tomorrow, nor next week, but maybe next year, when they can break a ceasefire for the 5th time to try and dispatch with Jews. For these people, the call for a ceasefire is a demand that Israel gives up any advantage it has to the benefit of Hamas and its killers. And according to reports, the Hamas plans found by IDF troops on the dead Hamas terrorists instructed them to go much further and deeper into the country and do more of those unspeakable things across Israel. Now, you may or may not believe that report which came from the Israeli authorities. That's up to you. I personally am much more likely to believe what comes out from Israel than the stuff spouted by Hamas. Hamas builds bunkers and stockpiles food and fuel for themselves and their fighters, while they hide behind innocent children in the hope the casualties will bring the whole region with them to wage war on Israel. Now that's the war crime. Not by Israel, that is telegraphing where it will attack in an effort to give non-combatants the chance to exit the battlefield, dropping leaflets, making telephone calls and using the door-knocking technique to forewarn people that the bombs will soon be hitting Hamas targets in that area. Anyway, I digress. The SNP leader, Humza Useless Yousaf, has written a letter to the Scottish Labour leader Anas Sarwar, who is backing a ceasefire call, asking him to confirm that the two Scottish Labour MPs, Ian Murray and Michael Shanks, will be voting for a ceasefire too. As you will be aware, I have been calling for an immediate ceasefire for a number of weeks now, Yousaf writes. Given that Scottish Labour has two MPs, I am urging you to confirm that they will vote in accordance with the policy you have set out as their leader, which is widely supported among the general public in Scotland and across the UK, as well as by the United Nations and its aid agencies, rather than the inadequate position being taken by Sir Keir. Now, this for the Tories could be a welcome development, because a vote on the issue would lead to a permanent record of who voted for or against a ceasefire and who abstained. And with Labour so split on this issue, it will be rather uncomfortable for Starmer, right when he thinks he has Sunak on the ropes, to have to start sacking members of his own top team. Now let's take this a bit further. Just suppose the UK government did call for a ceasefire, but neither side responded to the UK request. What are those demanding a ceasefire going to do next? If Hamas does not want to stop firing missiles indiscriminately into Israel, then what will those politicians do? And while those missiles keep being fired at Israel, the IDF will continue to prosecute their war aims. Hamas uses hospitals and children as shields, and that is 100% wholly their war crimes. But what will these politicians do if the fighting continues in spite of their call for a ceasefire? I have the nagging suspicion that many of them would like to see the UK dragged into this conflict in some form or other on the side of Hamas. All based on a body count coming from the Hamas health authorities. No matter that Hamas struck the first awful blow by breaking a ceasefire themselves, and then cynically using the vulnerable to stir up anger amongst the gullible that Hamas would also happily throw under the bus if they thought it in their interest to do so. Now, one Labour advisor told Sky News that the order at the moment is if you're on the front bench and you vote for the SNP amendment, you won't be on the front bench anymore. It could get very interesting tomorrow.